Welcome back to Elevate and Illuminate, the Empowerment Podcast. And as we continue through season 4, we've been exploring statewide reentry services, the programs, the partnerships, and the people working to support individuals returning home from incarceration. But today, we're stepping into another critical layer of that conversation: policy. Because no matter how strong our programs are, no matter how committed our organizations are, if the policies guiding the system are broken, outcomes will be too. Reentry is not just about services, it's about the systems those services operate within. And that includes probation, parole, and the policies that determine whether someone gets a real second chance or ends up back in the system for reasons that have nothing to do with new criminal behavior. That's why today's conversation matters. We're joined by a member of the leadership of Reform Alliance, an organization working to transform supervision systems and create policies that support success instead of setting people up to fail. Tonight, we're going to connect the dots between policy and practice and talk about what it really takes to build a reentry system that works from the inside out. Let's elevate, let's illuminate, and let's get into it. Again, welcome. I am your host, Jamarcus Fields, also the founder and executive director of Iron Sharpens Iron WASP, where we are stronger together. Um, and again, this season 4, has been about statewide reentry services. We have had some wonderful, empowering, and enlightening conversations thus far, and tonight we'll continue with that trend. So before we get into this, let me take a second, allow my guest to introduce herself to you guys, and then we'll jump to kickstart this conversation. The floor is yours.
Hi, Jamarcus. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the support and giving me the space to have this conversation. My name is Maranda Williams. I'm the Indiana State Organizer for Reform Alliance. So not in their large leadership, but I oversee all of the policy work and movement that they are doing here in Indiana.
Absolutely. See, she had a much fancier way of explaining that.
Mm.
Hey, so again, welcome. As always, the chat room is always open, so feel free. Any questions you have, put them in the chat. Just anything that you may want to add to the conversation, put in the chat room. And kind of introduce yourself in the chat. Get to know everybody else that is on here. Here with Iron Sharpens Iron. You know, our slogan is "We are stronger together." So we're always looking for networking, partnerships, and just opportunities to be able to connect with other individuals doing the same work. So that we can have a greater impact. So utilize the chat room. That's what it's there for. And with that, we will dive right into this conversation. So, Miranda, for those who may be unfamiliar, um, what is Reform Alliance and what is its mission, especially here in Indiana?
Absolutely. Well, hopefully everyone here or everyone in Indiana has heard of Reform Alliance, because that is my job as an organizer, to let everybody know who they are and what we're trying to do. But Reform Alliance is a national organization that aims to transforming policies and laws related to probation and parole that create work pathways to work and well-being. So our goal is to really transform the probation, parole, community supervision system that allows people to be successful, alleviating some of those barriers that the systems and history has created, where people have not had an opportunity to be successful just by what we have put in place, and really looking at how do we change the culture of the supervision system that still holds people accountable, but also provides opportunity for success for those who want to return back and be productive members of the community.
Absolutely.
Mm.
And a much needed space that we that is pivotal,
Mm.
that this is a space that works
Mm,
for reentry, because everybody that comes home from incarceration has some sort of post release supervision.
mm,
Either you're on probation, you're on parole, community corrections. There's a very small percentage who
mhm,
actually either complete their full sentence and
mhm.
have no supervision. But again, that's a very small percentage. So everybody has to experience this. So this is a part of the reentry process that we can't avoid.
A
Like
hundred
we have to,
percent.
yeah, like we can't avoid it, because for one, it's too pivotal. And then when you get into the work and you start paying attention to data and metrics, and we look at this recidivism rate,
Mm,
and most times people who aren't aware or educated of exactly what this recidivism entails, you look
mhm,
at those, from a green eye, you would think
mhm,
that, guys are just coming home and just committing new crimes and they're
mhm,
just lifetime felons, until
mhm,
you like really start to understand the data and the metrics and find out a lot of these are TRVs.
mhm. Right,
Like
right.
they
Well,
they
and
violated some form of their post release supervision and
mhm.
went back without a new criminal charge.
Right. Well, and even just as you say, as part of the reentry process, probation and parole community supervision is such a overlooked population in the criminal justice system, because there is this myth or theory that people should just be happy that they're out and not incarcerated. They're
Yeah,
not
that's the
behind a prison wall. They don't have a gun tower when they look out their cell, so they should just be thankful that they have this freedom, not quite understanding what that freedom looks like or how restrictive that freedom could actually be. So 100%. And another piece that people miss or in this reentry space is these are individuals who are already released. They served their time in prison. They have gave their time to society, and we have decided that yes, they can return back to the community under this supervision systems, and they're just kind of forgotten about because they're not behind a prison wall, they're not awaiting trial, they're not part of the law enforcement pipeline. So they're your neighbor. Your neighbor. They may be a parent picking up their kids from school. They may be your mailman. There's so many different scenarios where we interact with people on supervision in the community, and it's just such an afterthought for those of why this is a system that could really be revamped and restructured to work for not only public safety but our tax dollars.
right.
Mm.
So we've definitely already touched on how important and pivotal it is. But when we're talking reform and like reforming the system that is
Mm.
supervision, um, how does the reform of those uh, programs impact successful reentry?
Well, it has a huge impact on it. I mean, it's really the pivotal source of what reentry looks like when you're on supervision. I mean, it's the make or break of a person's success, because as you talked about, people return back to prison for technical violations, rule violations, and not committing a new crime, and that adds to our recidivism rate that we talk about. That can that's a buzzword, and not understanding what that means, not only for our tax paying dollars as we're paying for someone who's incarcerated, but really what it means for public safety. The individuals who are not going back to prison on a new charge, what does that public safety risk look like, and are we using our tax dollars appropriately to house them, or are there ways we can hold people accountable for their reentry or not reentry in the community, and still keeping them connected to their job, to their family, to their faith community, to their housing opportunities, rather than yanking them out of that nuclear system that has been working for them and putting them back into incarceration, because they're not following the rule, or we haven't figured out a better way of what accountability looks like. So it really is the pivotal piece of the reentry process in all aspects, because even as you said, you know it's less than 10% of people who leave DOC who are discharged from any type of supervision. There's always either parole, probation. When you're released on modification, you might go to community corrections. There's so many different pieces of that. Very rarely are you just walking out of those prison gates free and don't have to answer to anybody. But on
Right.
the flip side, probation initially in its conception was actually supposed to be a tool that helped, guided, and support. So the founder and father of probation, John Augusta, it was created because he helped a local drunkard, that's what they called it back in the day, not go back to jail. He told the judge, let him come live with me, let me get him sober, let me help him find a job, and if he could do that, let's keep him out of prison. And when he showed that that was successful, they kept giving him more and more people, which is how probation was founded. So the intent was never a compliance based process. It was all about hand holding, guiding, and supporting, as you're leaving, or, preventing the incarceration. So, we've just gotten so far away from it that, we need to get back to what its initial intent is for, and how can we do that efficiently, effectively, while always, public safety is going to be at the forefront of every conversation. We need to make sure that we're doing that. But can we do it without sending everybody back to prison and pulling them out of the community that they've built?
So, they say
Mhm.
it takes a system to
Mhm.
replace a system.
Mhm.
So I'm listening to how probation got started, and I'm
Mhm.
kind of like what iron sharpen iron does.
Yeah.
like like let's do away with probation, and individuals that they feel fit a probation criteria,
Mm.
let's send them to the iron sharpen irons,
Like, yeah,
ironclad, you
yeah.
know what I mean, Success
Right.
Academy. And
Mhm.
if they complete once they complete that, they're done. That way they
Mhm.
get wraparound services, um, no paid TRVs,
Yeah.
no going back to prison for,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
whatever the case may be. Which actually leads me to my next question. So we talk about TRVs. And for those that don't know, TRVs is technical rule violation. So what are some of the most common
Mhm.
ways like that people are sent back on these TRVs, and why is that
Mhm.
an issue?
Right. Well, and I do want to give a shout out to probation and parole just across the state, because we really have progressed in how we handle technical violations. We have the system, probation, parole officer or parole agents, probation officers have really worked on not just, send them back, send them back, send them back, but most commonly it's, failing a drug test, not having employment, not reporting when you're supposed to, not having a proper address or not being at the proper address. So these things that to a person not on probation or parole would not get in trouble for, we wouldn't get in trouble for not being home at a certain time. Law enforcement wouldn't come to our door if we weren't in at 11 o'clock. So I will say, like, we have done a really great job in progressing. We have some departments that, probation departments and parole offices, they don't violate if you don't pay your fines and fees, which is really nice to hear that we're progressing to that. We have probation office departments and parole agents who will do treatment referrals for people who fail their drug screenings rather than immediate immediate violation. So we are progressing slowly, but I think where we have the hiccups here in Indiana is it's not consistent across all 92 counties. I mean, the parole offices and the parole agents, they have a standard policy of how they work because they're oversight by the state. So it's really easy to have things outlined of how things are supposed to be. But when you have 92 counties that are 92 probation offices that answer to 92 plus different judges, it's really hard to streamline how things look. But we do have some probation departments that are doing really good and are trying to be innovative and think about ways to hold people accountable, but maybe not have incarceration be their first go-to. So if they are unemployed, like evaluating why is this person unemployed? Is it their skill set? Is it lack of opportunity? Is it a can't do versus won't do? Things like that, rather than just sending them back because they don't have a job. So, there are different things, but those are the most common. We have asked around reform. Our myself and our policy team has tried to get some data on what are some common violations across the different counties. Like, is there one glaring issue? And it's from what we've heard, departments don't really track the reason of the violation to that capacity. They just know that it's a violation. So that's something that we had looked at and talked to. That would be some nice data to see. What are the trends? What are consistencies? Are there things we could work through if there's a specific violation that is just glaring that everybody's coming back to? I think that would be really helpful to know. Or different trends in different counties. Because even reporting issues, sometimes people don't report because they have transportation issues, or their cell phone is shut off or their internet's cut off, and all of these things that may be out of their control. But
Right.
if you're not tracking that and figuring out what that looks like, it can look like a bigger concern.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Like that was the whole the why is this an issue part of
Hmm.
the question was kind of what I was getting at. Like I didn't know that they didn't track that. And that's because, in this day and age, everything is so heavy on data and metrics that, I thought that that was something that probably should have been tracked. And it's like it's great that they're at that issue and even having the conversation and bringing it up because if you have something that's this is a problematic area,
Hmm.
you should want to know that that's a problematic area so we can figure out what the issue is and how to fix it.
Hmm.
Now granted, i I'm not sitting here with a veil on expecting that they are trying to fix their own system. That's not where I'm going, but I'm like, these are definitely the conversations that need to be had when you're in that space.
Hmm.
Um, and looking at that type of stuff, like everything that we do, our metrics are tracked.
Mhm. And there may be probation departments that do track it in some capacity, but I think, as again, a statewide movement for community supervision, there isn't a data collection tool that could tell us how many people went back to prison on a non-employment violation. Like there's nothing that gives us that data, which it is exciting though, because I think it also gives us a place to start, as we're talking about change and what we want supervision to look like in Indiana. Finding out what's not happening is a good thing too, because we could see where the gaps are. How can we fill in those gaps? What can we be working on to make it a better system, rather than just coming in and being like, well, we know everything, we know how to fix this system, just step aside and let us do what we do. I think that's it's an it's a nice way to start looking at, okay, well, what can we be doing, what should we be looking for, what questions should we be asking while we're meeting with probation departments, leadership in the different communities, or even some of the reentry organizations. I don't know if they even track, with people who get out, like what was their violation when they came out, what, do they track when they come to them, what that looks like. So just different things that, when you're in this space all the time, you may not even think about it because you have the anecdotal information in your head, but it's not there reported, for the data and the metrics like you talked about.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I also can vouch for the at least the progress
Hmm.
that we have made in that area. Like I've um since embarking on this journey that is iron sharpens iron, I've developed quite a few relationships with some probation officers, some parole officers. I've mentored a lot of people on their caseload. So
Hmm.
like I see the effort in at least trying,
Hmm.
because I remember a time that a few times where a parole officer has called me and asked me if I could, talk to their client. And I remember once upon a time when that would have been a violation and they would have been back.
Right. I mean, think about if that you would have been asked to do that, 25 years ago. And the whole, yeah, that would have raised everybody's eyebrows. People would have been in straight panic because that wasn't a common practice. I mean, parole agents working with someone formerly incarcerated, allowing that communication, like, or even, the work that Iron Sharpens Iron does inside the prisons, like that that would not happen. That wouldn't have happened 25, 30 years ago. Absolutely not.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
Absolutely.
slow progress. So, but anytime you're looking at reforming a system as large as a criminal justice system, and unlearning some of the things that we think that has worked, or trying to pivot, you're trying to pivot a system that has been in place since the 1800s. I mean,
Yeah.
it's going to take a long time, and we are slowly making progress, which is always good. But some of us, we just want to see it faster than others. But I will say, Reform is the only organization that focuses on probation and parole. And to that point, since their establishment in 2019, we've already passed 22 bills, and let's see, 22 bills in 9 states. So, I mean, like, that's huge.
That's big.
Like,
Yeah.
22 bills since 2019, and the way the legislative process works, like, that is fantastic to have that much momentum in a space that there is nobody else working in. Yeah. So,
Wow. Absolutely. Good stuff. So we've talked, probation, parole, just kind of in general. But what policy changes has reform been advocating for in Indiana to create, fair and more effective systems?
So when reform first came to Indiana, we were championing a compassionate release bill for 2 legislative cycles. So the focus was those who were hospice care, geriatric, reprieve, skilled nursing. So we tried 2 legislative cycles. We did not get that bill passed. And after that, although we had a lot of momentum, a lot of bipartisan support, but I think we just weren't ready yet. As a state, we weren't ready to take that leap. So once those bills didn't get passed, we just really pivoted to building up power in the community, trying to figure out what Hoosiers want out of this probation and parole reform. Reform knows what we think we should do, but it was really important to get the buy-in from the community, buy-in from individuals with lived experience, those who work in this space, direct service providers, faith leaders, employers, and even law enforcement, correctional staff. So the past year and a half, I have just been traveling across the state, gathering information, seeing what people want to see out of this change, and trying to figure out how it fits in with who's your culture, who's your mentality, who's your hospitality, all of that. So, and of just building out the coalition, building out a network of people that can support each other and collaborate on some of these efforts. Reform stays in the lane of probation and parole reform. We don't get involved in other different reforms, but we have a lot of coalition partners who do other work, and we've created a coalition of leaders all across the state to kind of have a landing pad of shared ideas, shared missions. So you aren't just out here doing this work alone or reinventing the wheel. If you're up in Northwest Indiana, you might be trying to do something that someone in Southeast part of the state has already done. So bringing people together. So I'm really proud about the work that we have done in building out the partnerships and the power and the collaboration. Aside from that, we're also working on our federal legislation, the Safer Supervision Act, which focuses on those who are on federal supervised release, and just reforming that system that has never really been looked at either. Since its conception, there's never really been a data study or anyone kind of looking at, hey, are we fixing, or are we helping, are we doing what we're supposed to be doing with the intent of probation as it was built at. So we're really excited about that. And the federal bill is extremely important for Hoosiers because we need to build up the momentum of change here in Indiana. And anytime federal criminal justice reform is passed, it really makes other states look at, well, hey, if it can be done on a federal level, maybe we should be reevaluating what we're doing. So it's a really great way to create momentum and kind of show people that we can look at criminal justice reform, and it doesn't have to be radical. It doesn't have to be scary. It could just really be following best practices, what the data says. And, we can make small steps to just making people, providing opportunity and success for those who want it on supervision.
Absolutely. So that was a that was a mouthful. You said
Yeah.
change in Indiana.
Right, right.
That was a mouthful because once upon a time, you know, I I I always looked at Indiana because of the mentality that I felt like Indiana had, which was a lock 'em up first mentality.
Mhm,
Like we had one of the fastest growing prison populations in the country. Um, and so when you talk change, that's why for me, when I vouch, like that's big for me to see the impact that
mhm,
some of this work is having because, once upon a time I just thought, to let me tell it, I would have thought every other state would have come on board and Indiana would be last.
mhm,
Um,
right.
so, to see change embarking, even if it's just small steps, for me that's a lot. And I don't mean small steps in a literal sense, because again, we talking iron sharpens iron, like you just said. 25
Yeah.
years ago this wouldn't have been happening.
Mhm,
So that shows change in itself, just from the time that I've been released since
mhm,
2019. Like I've
right.
seen a lot of change. I don't know how many times I've had to kind of pause and just kind of address the Iron Man, like, take this in. You know what I mean? Like, take this
Mhm,
in, like the magnitude of like what's really happening, what we're doing, and where we are right now. Like, take this in, because once upon a time this didn't seem possible and it didn't exist.
right.
Especially here in Indiana. I can't speak for any of the other states, but here. So I'm like, to some degree, we can see the impact manifesting in the
Mhm,
work that we do in the spaces we are now stepping foot in.
right. 100%. And I think there's a collective agreement that we know something needs to change in the probation, parole, community supervision space. But there's always a fear and a concern, and trying to public safety is always going to be the number one concern. I can't talk about
Yeah.
that enough. But I think the fact that the conversation is happening, people are willing to come to the table and be open minded about even reform being here. We don't have to
Yeah.
have people join our coalition. We don't have to have people come to our events, come to the job fairs that we host, or they could be pushing back on the work that we're trying to do. But I've lived in Indiana my whole life. I'm a Hoosier till the end, and I'm just excited to see even how well reform has been accepted, as far as like, hey, they are here, they want to help. They're not just coming in talking about this is what you need to do, this is how you need to change your community. It really is about putting the responsibility of Hoosiers in all aspects of the community. It's not just iron sharpens iron responsibility to fix and support the system. It's not just the Indiana Department of Corrections responsibility to prepare everyone for every scenario when they get released. It's not the probation department, it's not the courts, it's literally every person in the community, because public safety affects everyone regardless of what you believe, how you feel, your political alignment. Everybody should care about public safety. Everybody should care about wanting to be in their home and feel safe, being in a shopping mall and feel safe, and everything that goes with the comfort of having good policies and laws that do that. So I could go on forever about that, but I am excited to know that we have people behind reform supporting us. Like said, coming to our events, hopping on our coalition calls, supporting our federal bill. So the hunger is there, people want it. It's just, how do we get there, and what could this look like?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Mm.
So currently, what are what are some of the ways that the system maybe unintentionally creates barriers instead of pathways?
Mm. Well, I think the biggest one is, anytime we have employment barriers where individuals are automatically disqualified for a job because of their criminal background. I mean, disregarding skill set, education level, work performance benefit to the community, just having a blanket policy that doesn't even allow individuals an opportunity creates a huge barrier, unintentionally, because again, you're trying to think about liability and keeping your community safe. But w- we can't put everybody in a box, and and create these barriers and then expect things to go well or people to be successful if we're not providing opportunity. So I the employment piece is so huge. We have to look at, can how do we provide more employment opportunities for those who are on supervision, again, because they're already out, they have served their time, this is a part of their sentence, they're your neighbor, they're my neighbor. How do we get them back to work in a good paying job where they could be paying taxes, supporting their families, contributing back to their community?
Absolutely. I know even today at the job fair this morning, or the resource fair, um and I said job because a lot of the inquiries that I got was surrounding employment.
Mhm.
Like a lot of individuals looking for jobs, um, getting turned down because of their felony, um, being bagged into a corner because they're obligated to have employment. But what do you do when you just nobody will hire you?
Right,
Like,
right.
what do you do when that's part of your supervision, that you have
Mm,
to be employed, but no
mhm.
one will hire you? Like, what do you do? And with that
Mhm.
being such a definitive line,
Mhm.
how then does probation parole, as you mentioned earlier, like how do they measure that? Like it's not like the individual isn't trying.
Right,
Like
right.
they're
Mhm.
trying everything they can, but they just can't get anyone to hire them. They're
Mm.
even getting interviews.
Mhm.
And then, well, we decided to go with someone else. And of course, they automatically think, like, well, man, they took me through all this. They gave me the tour. They had me do all this stuff just to tell me they ended up going with somebody else. In their mind, they're automatically going to compute
Mhm.
that it was the felony that got them turned down. Um, and that starts to discourage a lot of
Mhm.
individuals. Like,
Yeah, and
so
well, yeah, and not even the interviewer tours. We've heard individuals who weren't even on supervision. They just had they had a criminal background who were actually working like on the job on the floor, and they were walked out after their background was ran, even with them being honest, that they had, information on their packet. So be prepared for that. But sometimes what we're seeing is there's even a disconnect on who's doing the hiring and who wants to hire the person, and who the HR department is, or like the company policies. So they may not be talking to each other. So I can imagine feeling discouraged knowing that you have this really great job and you like it, and then you're told in mid shift that you have to go because of your background. So and that's where the conversation has to continue, like how do we create policies and change systems and cultures to create those pathways for opportunity, and allow businesses to feel comfortable and take chances on individuals with a criminal record. Yeah, and when you hear this, and we know that there's some charges that just, may not align with certain fields, and understand all of that. But, I think, we as a community need to continue the conversation of how do we bring along more fair chance employers, and getting exposure to this untapped talent and population that people don't think about, that could be filling jobs and working.
absolutely.
Mhm. And
Absolutely.
Jamarcus, I do want to say I misspoke because I had a brain fog. But so reform has passed 22 bills in 19 states. But since 2019,
Okay.
but that's still, I mean, that's huge. And all
Yeah.
and all and we are a bipartisan organization. All of our legislation is bipartisan. So what, in the criminal justice space, that's huge.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Um, so we talked earlier, well, we mentioned, data, metrics, the whole nine. So
Mhm.
what role does data play in shaping the reforms that you guys push for?
Mm. Well, data has to drive the conversation. I mean, having strong data collection tools and strong analysis of why change needs to happen is so imperative. It can show trends, it could show what's working, but even more importantly, what's not working. What laws we have that just make us feel safe, but aren't really
Mhm.
making our community safe. So that is so important to have data to back up what you're trying to push. You need things that are evidence based. That's just part of good policy. We all know some of the anecdotal stories that you hear about the system and why things need to change, but you need the data to back it up. And if you have a strong data study that can't be argued of why change needs to happen, like that's everything. And you have the fiscal responsibility attached to that data. How much are these policies and laws costing us as taxpayers? And again, like, is it keeping us safe, or do we just feel safe?
Right.
But along with that, I do want to say data is huge, so important. It's huge, and I'm a huge data nerd when it comes to that. I love hearing about it, but the lived experience that goes along with that, and the storytelling to back up what this data says, really puts that perspective of a person to that number and an experience that a data trend can't tell. You know, when you're talking about a person, being violated and pulled out of their community and returning back to incarceration, and the disruption it can cause, and the domino effect it can cause in everyone's life, for a rule violation, data can't express what that really looks like or what it means to a community.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I realized, that data tells tells a story, but it doesn't give all the details in the story
Right.
that it tells.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
yeah, definitely with the lived experience coming in and adding the details that
Mhm.
makes it, the numbers make sense,
Yeah.
is big. And that's one of the, you know, things that we kind of rely on and lean on with iron sharpens iron is, we got a whole team of people who have a bunch of different set of experiences that we have lived through. So
Mm.
not only are we tracking the data, but then we have the stories that go
Mm.
with it in the
Mm.
ways that it impacted us and countless others that we know that have either come home, or some that are back inside, and we're being able to be their voice and sharing their stories.
100%. And well, and the great thing about data, like I said, it also shows us, what's not working. If we're looking at recidivism rates or unemployment rates, or policies that have been put in place, like data will tell you if you need to pivot. Which again, the criminal justice system, we're not the best at pivoting, but some of the things that some of the best things that have happened with the system regarding using individuals with lived experience and bringing them in the space of criminal justice and reentry, which again 25 years ago would have never happened. Like data told us, hey, we need to pivot, we need people who have lived this experience to tell us what are we doing wrong, or how do we need to guide these conversations because we don't understand. So, I that's one of the things, I've always appreciated iron sharpens iron and the population that you all serve, and guiding that, because you have to have, you have to have someone who's walked in their shoes. I could never connect with a person in your program the way that one of your iron men could. Like that's just, it would never happen to that. I may be empathetic, maybe sympathetic, I may understand, but I would really never understand that.
Right.
Mm, yeah.
So how can community organizations and just everyday citizens support the work that you guys do at a state level?
Mm. Well, I think the biggest thing is coming to conversations about supervision reform with an open mind. We have to come to a place. Even if we think the system is great, there, we can always improve on something. There's always a space that we could be doing things better. So really accepting the fact that like we need some improvements. We need a revamp. We need something better than what we have now, and it's nobody's fault that the system is what it is. I mean, this is again, years and years of evolution of the criminal justice system. So it's not one person, one agency's, one community's faults. This is just where we're at. So how do we have open conversations, meeting people where they're at, and discussing what change needs to look like, and just accepting that maybe we can be doing things better. And I think just really getting involved in, the advocacy and organizing. If you have a great idea that you think, could work, reaching out to organizations like Reform Alliance or even Iron Sharpens Iron, and throw an idea out and saying, hey, does this make sense? This doesn't, I don't understand why this works like this. Could we do it like this? And having those conversations to see what could be changed, what's reality, what's not going to happen, and understanding, how we get system change moving, how we get laws passed. I'm a huge advocate of knowing who your legislator is, what they believe in when you're voting, understanding you know, who you're voting for and why you're voting for it and how much that impacts your voice in that change. And I think everybody should vote regardless of what party. That is your civic duty to be voting and being part of your community. And the legislative process can be really confusing and frustrating, but if you're passionate about something and you want to see something change, getting involved, having conversations. I will always advocate for people joining our coalition because, like I said, we have over 120 plus community partners from all disciplines of the community and all parts of the state working together on a common mission of public safety and supervision reform, but others have things that they are doing that's important to them that you can connect with and get involved and collaborate and you know just working together and building a community and a state that we want to see.
Absolutely. So for someone who's, maybe, listening um and whether they're on live now or they go back and view the recording and they have this urge to want to get involved.
Mhm.
Um, what does involvement look like from a policy standpoint, from trying to change when you're talking legislative, when you're talking about, going, the state house, like what does that look like
Yeah.
for someone who may want to get involved?
Well, the great thing about advocacy is it can look like whatever you want it to look like, and you can put as much time and effort into it as you want because there's organizations like Reform who this is their job is to work on changing policies and laws. So there's different levels. I think just again joining a coalition like mine and having the conversations. If I think what some people don't know is they could meet with their legislator. You don't need permission to email the legislator and ask for a meeting and tell the legislator, hey, I want to change this law or I think this is a good idea. And work with the legislator to write your own law and go through the process. So you could be as involved in that. You could be as involved as just tracking specific laws that may be harmful or beneficial to you and writing your legislator, telling them how you want them to vote on it. You could go down to the state house and testify during a committee hearing, a public committee hearing. If you want to be that involved, you can gather support letters for or opposition letters for specific legislation. You can spread the word. You could have people, you could call your legislator and leave a message saying you want them to vote a certain way on a law. Or you can just even attending events like job fairs, and again, just being part of the conversation, and saying this is what I think change should look like, and letting the rest of us who are already doing the work, if you want us to take the lead and give us the information, we could take it back. We that it's really a space for everyone. And not everybody has time to be at the state house and testifying and writing their legislators. So just sharing a space with people, finding where you fit in, what you're comfortable with, and really how passionate you are about seeing that change and how much time you want to dedicate to it.
Good
Mm,
stuff.
yeah. And
So
voting. Go back to like if nothing else, at least just cast your vote and know and research your candidates. Know who you're voting for.
absolutely.
Mm,
So what would you say to someone currently on probation or parole who feels like the system is set up for them to fail?
mhm. Oh, that's yeah. I mean, it's well, I will always advocate for individuals to work closely with their supervision officer and expressing what they want their success to look like and building out that plan and always revisiting that plan and sticking to the end goal. So, being vocal and communicating, finding a way to respectfully advocate for yourself in those spaces. Um, Reform has a storytelling campaign where we ask people to share their stories about their experience on probation and parole and community supervision, so people understand why change needs to happen. So even, showing that support by sharing your story, or again getting involved in some advocacy work if the barriers that are holding back your success are because of systems and cultures and laws, really figuring out how do I get involved in an organization like Reform to help change these things. So there's different levels, but utilizing your parole agent or your probation officer as a resource and working together. One of the things, supervision can feel restrictive and feel like a type of incarceration, but the one benefit of it is you really do have a connection to community resources, community referrals, and access to social networks that you may not have if you didn't have that probation officer, that parole agent guiding you through those conversations. They're always someone you could go back to for resources and help. So someone who's discharged or off of supervision, you don't always have that privilege. You're kind of navigating the system on your own and you don't really know what it looks like. So just trying to get the system to work for you, which I know it can be difficult. Personalities can clash, and you might find yourself just getting frustrated. But I think staying positive, focusing on that success plan, and again, if it's a system issue, hey, we have Reform Alliance, we have the Indiana Secure Communities Coalition. You could join, and Reform also has a Reform Advocacy Institute that we have people all across the country join, and it teaches organizing techniques, policy and law, legislative changes. It's an 8-week course, and you go through cohorts. It's just a really great place to get involved in advocacy work and organizing from an organization who, that's her livelihood and that's what we do. So I will definitely want to pitch that as well. Mhm.
Mm,
Oh, and
okay.
another way they can get involved is sign the Safer Supervision Act petition. So they can go to
Absolutely.
safersupervision.com, sign that petition, join the coalition, read up on what the bill does, contact, their lawmaker, tell them that they want this too. That's just signing the petition will take less than a minute and they're already advocating for a better system.
Absolutely. So I want
Mhm,
to jump on the tail end of the last question, um, in terms of somebody that's maybe currently on probation or parole, who feels like the system is set up for them to fail. Um, you know, as an individual with the lived experience and having had to navigate post-release supervision myself, um, I'm of this mindset of, one, you're free physically from
mhm,
prison. Um, and prison was set up for you to fail, and you made it through that. So it's been set up to fail from the beginning. It didn't
mhm,
just start with supervision.
mhm,
So for me, it's like, don't forget where you just came from. Like, this is another program that you have to complete.
mhm,
When we're doing time, we're big on programs for whatever reasons. Everybody has their different reasons for why programs are important to them. Some
mhm,
people, they really want to grow, to change, to be what we consider the best version of themselves. Some people playing the game.
mhm, mhm,
They checking boxes and they trying to get to the finish line. My thing is, coming home from prison and having to deal with probation or parole, you've made it to the finish line. Now you have to cross it. So the
Mm,
journey and the race isn't complete yet.
mm,
So we gotta, and I often say, I'm big on the accountability,
of course.
and we've gotten ourselves in these positions where we have to be boxed in and confined by these rules. Never mind the circumstances that led up to it. Never mind how long you had to do, how long you've been doing it. The reality is we are caught up in this system. Now we have a duty and an obligation to figure this out. And that if that means we got to color between the lines, then you better slow down and learn how to
Mhm.
color between the lines in order to complete this program. So,
Well, and
um,
that statement is just why the lived experience is so important in this reentry process. Like how you talked about that, I could never explain what you just explained to somebody who's frustrated with the system and feels like the system is against them, because I'm like, oh, stay positive, work, and then here you just provided such meaningful insight on what that could look like for them. So, I mean, I appreciate, again, like what you guys are doing in the community, how you're supporting people releasing, because they need it. They need to hear from people who have had that journey, not just someone who has worked in the system with the education, who's read all the textbooks and all the data. It's so important. So, thank you so much. I mean, even that, you saying that gave me a different perspective on how I needed to be communicating uh, that question as well, and answer. That's great. Mm,
that part. So,
yeah.
before we get out of here, first, thank you.
Mhm.
I know what the day has looked
Mhm.
like for you. We've been
You
together all
you
day.
I was like, you too. I mean, yeah. But I also,
Um,
again, I'm just saying this, but I think it also speaks to your commitment to the community. I mean, you got up, drove almost 3 hours to a job fair to come back to do this podcast. And even when we talked about possibly canceling, you said, no, I canceled last week. Like, I need to make sure I'm consistent. So I appreciate that, because, not everybody who is in the reentry space would have that commitment and have the drive and stay mission driven. So I appreciate you and all the support you've given the coalition. And I've came to you with many problems and asking questions and insight. Hey, help me figure this out. I've asked you to speak at my class. So, I know your schedule's demanding. So, keep up the good work, and thank you for everything that you're doing to serve, the people that are being released. Mhm.
Absolutely. So, any last thoughts, statements, anything you want to stay in their brains with before we get out of here that maybe you didn't get to mention?
No, I will just mention again, safersupervision.com. Go on there, sign that petition, for the petition to three of your friends, ask them to sign it. Again, this impacts federal supervised release, but it's so important to how we move and the momentum that we can get here in Indiana and get meaningful policies, laws, and systems changed for our Hoosiers.
Absolutely. And one more time, where do they go?
Safersupervision.com. Very,
Safersupervision.com.
very
And
simple. And they can go to reformalliance.com to fill out the storytelling campaign card, and to learn more information about REI, our Reform Advocacy Institute. All of
definitely,
that's on there.
like, inform, educate yourself, like, go on there and read it and see what it's about.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm sure, if you're on here listening to this, if you're following what I do, like, it'll interest you.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm not just blowing in the wind telling you to go check it out. Like, I went and checked it out. I've signed the petition. So
Mhm.
go check it out. And as it speaks to you, execute. Um,
Um,
That's what it is. So again, Miranda, I thank you. I thank you. I thank you again also for your commitment. Like I said, I know what the day has looked like. It's been a long day for both of us, so I appreciate you um, for coming on, for sharing the work that you guys do at Reform Alliance, and your passion for this work as well. Um, to everybody who tuned in, thank you. For tuning in, for following, for always engaging in both the Elevate and Illuminate and Iron Sharpens Iron. Um, Hopefully soon you guys will all be involved with Reform Alliance as well, and we'll be working together to make some changes happen, and to be a force of impact. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So as we close out tonight's conversation, here's the reality. Reentry doesn't succeed in silos. Policy matters, programs matter, people matter. You can have the best programs in the world, but if policies are sending people back for technicalities, progress gets erased. You can change policies, but without programs and community support, people will people still struggle to navigate the transition. And even with both in place, without peer support, without people who understand the journey and walk alongside someone, transformation becomes that much harder to sustain. That's the ecosystem we've been talking about all season. Policy creates the framework, programs create the pathway, but people, peers, mentors, community create the possibility. And when all three align, that's when we move from cycles of incarceration to cycles of restoration. If tonight's conversation challenged you, don't let it end here. Stay informed, stay engaged, support organizations doing the work on every level. And if you want to be part of a peer led movement that's helping connect these dots on the ground, visit Iron Sharpens Iron, WAST.org to learn more. Because real change doesn't happen in pieces. It happens when we build systems that actually give people a fair shot at moving forward. Until next time, keep elevating, keep illuminating, and keep building what real second chances require. Good night. Love is love.
Have a good one.